Hi! Welcome to this part of my review featuring Unknown Armies, Book 1, Play. If you haven't seen the other parts of my review, featuring this role-playing game, where the player characters fight the status quo and use occult means to achieve their ends, please check out the playlist in the description below. This time, we are going to talk about character details, starting with the shock gauge. Before we begin, I would like to talk about this channel's sponsor, Heroes and Hardships. This is a universal RPG system, allowing you to play any sort of genre, adventure, campaign, any sort of story. You have hundreds of tools to assist you with that. The Kickstarter is about to begin. The links to the Kickstarter and the website are going to be in the description below. I am also going to put links to my reviews of the Quick Start guide that I recommend that you watch if you want to know a bit more about the system, and to the setting of Wallace, based on the life and exploits of William Wallace, a good example of the sort of adventures that you can experience using Heroes and Hardships. So please check it out. Now, let us continue. Let's talk about characters first. You play as a character that exists in the 21st century and is dealing with existential mystic horror. The complexity of your character is quite great when compared to other role-playing games. And your character has been scarred. Your character could be considered a bit damaged because of different psychological factors. You have seen some pretty horrifying things in your days. So this means that your character needs to deal with this trauma, with these psychological blows. After all, there is a reason as to why that character is using occult means to achieve what he or she wants. And of course, this means that the character has a strong, compelling, non-debatable reason to care about the group's goals, the collective objectives, be it to destroy an organization, to take over the world, or to perhaps modify the astrological influences of planets upon planet Earth. It could be anything, as grand or as specific as you want it to be. When it comes to the shock gauge, this is a way to measure the character's experiences in life, the traumas and the things that he or she will face during the adventures. You have stress checks, with 5 categories in total. You have violence, the unnatural, helplessness, isolation, and self. One character could be quite damaged in one of these aspects, in these categories. For example, maybe you are not really used to handling isolation. But when it comes to violence, you are pretty strong when dealing with that. Each stress has 2 types of notches. Hardened notches represent stress checks that you have beaten, and they are numbered 1 to 9. Failed notches represent stress checks that you have failed, and they are numbered 1 to 5. Different stresses have different threat levels, ranging from 1 to 10. These are called ranks. The higher the rank, the more uncommon and scarring the experience for the character. Lots of people can shrug off a rank 1 check, but a rank 10 check is a bit more difficult to deal with. If you already have a hardened notch on the same meter and at the same rank as the stress, you don't have to roll. You ignore the check because you've faced this down before and prevailed. Failed notches don't affect stress checks. For example, maybe you face a violence 4 check. You have 5 hardened notches on your violence meter, therefore you don't have to roll. If you don't have a hardened notch at the rank of the stress check, roll against an identity that protects that meter. If you don't have an identity that fits, use a default ability. For example, you could defend against challenges related to violence with fitness, because you are either dodging or resisting the violent impact. Or maybe it's something related to helplessness. You can defend using status, maybe you have the resources to enforce some sort of change. If you succeed, mark off the lowest unmarked hardened notch on the appropriate meter. If you fail, you mark off the lowest unmarked failed notch instead, and choose one of 3 reactions: panic, paralysis, or frenzy. A failure may have other long-term effects as well. It's common to have both hardened and failed notches in the same meter. Someone who's deep in both directions in isolation probably has a highly ambivalent attitude towards being alone, which is perfectly in character for people who have been repeatedly exposed to that mental stress. Someone with the same setup for violence feels little or nothing when exposed to most forms of bloodshed, but when something is so shocking that it gets through the hardened barrier, the result is devastating. You may also notice that the ratings are given as a range, not as a hard single digit. This is because different people from different backgrounds, different cultures, and different families have different tolerances. Let's talk about the different stress categories. When it comes to violence stress, you have an instinctive revulsion towards actual violence. It is generally stressful for you to hurt others, to watch others be hurt, and to get hurt. When it comes to unnatural stress, it hurts your brain to think of things that don't belong in your concept of the world. Contemplating infinity for too long, for example, or perhaps realizing that magic actually works. Concerning the helplessness stress, a sense of control is crucial for feelings of safety, even when it's completely unmerited. Concerning the isolation stress, this is a subtle danger. It corrodes your sanity by denying you input. You rely on other human beings for feedback. Without the opinions of others, you do not know how to judge yourself. Concerning the self-stress, this is the trickiest one. It's your guilt and self-loathing, but it's more than that. It's conflicts between what you believe and its damage to your ability to believe at all. A major stress is when you find out you're not the person you thought you were. Let me provide some examples. When it comes to sample violence checks, perhaps you witness an act of torture, or perhaps you witness a brutal mass execution. These different examples of checks have ranks that go lower or higher depending on the nature of the check. In the case of failed violence notches, perhaps you are very aware of violence, both as it exists and it is depicted. In the case of a hardened violence notch check, perhaps violence is a common feature of your mental landscape. Unlike less hardened people, you show little reaction at all when it is discussed or depicted in fiction. Concerning unnatural checks, perhaps you are successfully attacked with magic, or maybe you see an animal with human features. An example of a failed unnatural notch would be that you frequently feel like you are being watched. When it comes to a hardened unnatural notch effect or example, you now know and accept that there are vast, incomprehensible forces governing the universe. When it comes to helplessness checks, maybe you get fired from a job you love, or perhaps you watch someone you love die. In case of a failed helplessness notch example, maybe you are completely insane. Concerning a hardened helpless notch example, maybe you have a boundless faith in the ability of chaos to screw you over. Concerning a sample isolation check, perhaps you spend a week in solitary confinement, or maybe you are treated like a stranger by your closest friends for a week or more. When it comes to failed isolation notches, maybe you are a bit nervous around new people, eager to make a good impression. When it comes to hardened isolation notch examples, perhaps unless you are concentrating, you lack dialogue skills. You don't like it when people interrupt, but you frequently interrupt others. when it comes to sample self checks, maybe you like to conceal some aspect of your personality from a close friend or loved one who trusts you implicitly. Or perhaps you discover that you have inadvertently committed an act of cannibalism. A failed self-notch example would be: you frequently feel like you are watching your every action from the outside. You have little or no sense of will or volition. It's as if you are a passive observer, along for the ride while your body goes through the motions. Concerning hardened self-notch examples, maybe half the time you only know you're telling the truth if you take a minute to think about it. Truth and lies aren't nearly as important as they used to be, back before you quit lying to yourself. And these are just a few examples of the many different checks, situations, and consequences resulting from those tests. Thank you for watching this part of the review. In the next part, we are going to talk about mental trauma. So it's very simple to understand. Your character is going to be encountering these disturbing situations. They could be of a lower or higher rank depending on the situation. As mentioned earlier, getting a bit hurt is not going to be the same as watching someone else get tortured or become the victim of torture yourself. So these are going to be difficult tests that your character could potentially encounter in the dangerous occult world of the 21st century. It may end up leaving a severe scar upon your soul. Thank you for watching this part of the review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.